I want to say very little this morning. I'm going to talk on what I will call the faraway God. I believe that we are experiencing in the world, and have been experiencing probably almost from the time of the first fall of man, the radiation in the world of a concept which is itself destructive. The way in which a concept is radiated into the world may not be known by you, and it does not have to be known by you in order for you to experience the effects of what I'm talking about, the concept of the faraway God. First of all, if man does not sense the God within himself, where will he look for him? Why, on the outside, of course. Above him, around him, in his environment, near or far. I believe then that the sinister force, the negative powers of the world, the hierarchy of the negative, have deliberately created the illusion of the faraway God because of the results of man's acceptance of the concept. If God is remote rather than near at hand, then of course, depending on how remote he is, we may feel a sense of great frustration in the search for him. For example, supposing that we thought that God was out here on some particular planet in another solar system so many light years away, and we were working toward the goal of establishing a spaceship that could traverse this distance. There would always be the idea, will this spaceship be created in my lifetime? And will I be able to be one of those fortunate ones to board it? And will it reach its destination? And will I see or contact this far away God? Now you can see that frustration would naturally come about through entertaining the concept. It's an interesting thing in this connection how the Christ, Messiah, was promised. And in one way, if we're going to relate this to time or space, God as he relates to time or space, we're going to have to more or less think of him as the ancient Hebrews did of the Messiah that was to come. He is coming. We're going to be able to contact him. We're going to be able to be a part of him, to see what he's like, to examine him. As Jesus said, touch me, taste, more or less feel, handle me, and see what I am. And of course, this is the nature of people. Have you ever noticed a baby? The first thing a baby will do with everything is pop it in its mouth, because the baby wants to taste. And through the Lord's Supper, people are able to fulfill the ancient urge, infantile though it may seem, of actually tasting or handling, partaking of this remote God. All right. Is it wise then that we should think of God as far away? I think that the greatest panacea of all in conceiving of God is to consider that God is filling the universe as air fills a balloon. In other words, the breath of the Almighty has actually pushed out this expanding universe, and the cosmic ethers, whether man wishes to acknowledge them or not, are still existing in this universe and afford us the same sense of oneness that we experience in our own physical body. For example, do you say to yourself, if someone asks you where you live, that you live in your toe? Do you say you live in your head, in your heart, in your fingers? What part of your body do you live in? The answer, quite obviously, is all of it. Any part of it that is disturbed automatically disturbs the central nervous system. And can you locate the self in one particular place and say he is there and he is nowhere else? I don't think so. You can find a seat or center of the self or of the soul. But I do not think that you would want to say that that is the only place that the soul is. In one sense of the word, you live then in all of yourself, but you refuse to be confined to it. You insist on touching with your eyes sensory objects. You insist on handling things with your hand, on popping things into your mouth, on examining the nature of substance. This is, of course, a very common function, and one which probably has the greatest ecumenism in it of anything, because everyone, practically on earth, desires to use their physical senses. Well, we can examine the body and we can penetrate the world with its illusions, with our senses. But we find this is not enough to find God with. We need the cultivation of the inner senses of the soul. The inner senses of the soul may have independent functions outside of a physical form, but once the form and the soul are one, for all practical purposes, there is an extension of the physical senses that occurs as the soul begins to correlate to the physical senses and use them, so that we say we see an aura. We do not actually see the aura with our physical eyes. I want to make that clear. The physical eyes may gaze at a person, and we may fix the approximate position of the person from a spatial relationship standpoint. And so we bring the person to ourselves. There is a heterodyning, a beating of the frequencies of our own thought, our own penetrating thought, our own extension of consciousness out toward the person. And this heterodyne or beat against the frequency of their aura gives us a third frequency. And as we develop spiritually, we learn how to interpret this frequency. And this, of course, then is really a scientific function whereby the soul extends itself, uses the physical senses, but does not have to be bound by them in actuality. Now we're talking about the faraway God. We have face to face then two concepts. That is, we face two concepts. One, this God that is remote in a time-spatial sense, and two, this God that is penetrating all things and filling all things. St. Paul seemed to favor the latter. He said, "Ye men of Athens, as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I saw an altar to the unknown God, whom ye therefore ignorantly worship. Him declare I unto you, God that made the heavens and the earth," and so on. He goes on, cannot live just in the heavens and the earth, but he fills all things, and in one sense he says, ye are also his offspring. Ye are the offspring of God. You have sprung from God. Well then, the question that we have to face here is, how far can you spring from God and still not retain your identification with God? Can you actually spring from God and go someplace that God is not? That's the simple equation. I do not think you can. And therefore there is no such thing as a remote God, and the whole thing is an illusion projected into the consciousness of man in order to give him a sense of remoteness, a sense of separation, a feeling of being alone. Do you see? And this is not a beneficial feeling. It is one of the feelings that actually enables men to kill, to rape, to steal, to practice black magic, and to be an egotist. Because God doesn't see him. We first see this magnificent concept here functioning in the Garden of Eden through the fig leaf consciousness, where Adam is wandering around here in the garden, and God says, Adam, Adam. Now, do you suppose that God didn't know where he was? God was looking for Adam. He couldn't find him. Why? Because Adam's consciousness was no longer aware of God's consciousness, and there was no meeting. Do you see? There was no meeting, no coordinates. So he says, where are you? He says, I am here. I am here, God. He said, I knew you were looking for me, and I hid myself because I'm naked. Who told you you were naked? God said. Did you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? So you see, right there we are face to face with the fact that it was the mind that was altered, not the outer conditions at all. And we begin to understand what Mary Baker Eddy was talking about in Science and Health, about reality and unreality. We begin to understand why science, in this case the science of God, can heal. Because the fig leaf consciousness is not real. It has no reality. The only reality that there is perfection. Perfection lives and will always live. Imperfection will die because it is imperfect. It is imperfect and it does not have the perfection of immortality within it, and therefore it has to die. So then, a great deal of the reality of God is actually pulled into our being through the simple concept of returning to the sense of unity with the Father and no separation from him. This is of course true. We are no longer separated from God. We are a complete whole with God. We are one with God. God is all good. He manifests through us. His perfection manifests through us. We manifest in him. And he cannot have imperfection manifesting in him. So what is it of us that is manifesting in God? Why, perfection, of course. That's what he created us in, the image of his perfection. So there is a great deal to be said then for our realizing this, because it is the carnal mind that accepted the idea of duality, the knowledge of good as one half of the duality, and the knowledge of evil as the other half of the duality. This is how the whole scheme was thwarted by the serpent, which is symbolical now of the intelligent carnal mind. The carnal mind that St. Paul referred to and said could not know God. The carnal being, which he said, flesh and blood he called it, could not inherit God. So, let us recognize the enormous possibilities in accepting these concepts. I suspect sometimes that if we constantly refuted the negative, denied it every time it reared its ugly head, took our heels and beat them down on the serpent's head, and said, only God is living in me, that we would not have to decree so much, because I am confident that the necessity of doing the decrees comes about because of the creations we have made, the carnal creation that we have made through wrong thinking. If we were to practice then right thinking at all times and never, never, ever practiced wrong thinking, I believe that we would automatically come into a consciousness of God similar to that which Abraham had. It says, and Abraham was a friend of God, and the Lord did not count the sins of Abraham unto him. He didn't impute any karma unto Abraham, because you see, Abraham didn't impute karma to himself. His thoughts were with God. He was a friend of God, of good. Then, by being a friend of good and by holding the immaculate concept for ourselves and others, we are able to abort this dual consciousness and substitute for it the overcoming consciousness of the universal Christ. We are then no longer living in a spirit of vain competition, where you and I are competing to see who is the most spiritual, who is the wisest, who is the strongest and healthiest, who is the richest, who is the greatest. But we are willing to become servants of that which is the greatest in all of us, because only by being that can God express here among men and teach them the way to his kingdom. Christianity originally had a little of this fragrance, quite a bit of it when Jesus was here. In fact, it had it all, but it didn't recognize the fullness of the Godhead as dwelling bodily in him. It didn't recognize that, according to Colossians. So we can see this also in fact as well as in the Scriptures. For the Scriptures are usually confirmed by fact when we understand properly that which we're reading. So there is a great deal then to be said for our acceptance of this idea of the nearness of God to each one of us. And it does not matter what appears in the physical appearance world. If a cloud appears in the sky, and the cloud is a destructive storm, by saying there is that destructive storm, and it's going to destroy people and houses, and it may destroy me, we may set up a magnet that will draw it right to us. If instead we say, and we're not like the Christian scientist in Hades saying I'm not there, it's not an idea of denying something and then not being wise enough to realize that of course it's there. But is it? It's a matter of understanding that it has no permanence. Therefore, for the standpoint of spiritual metaphysics, we are going to have to say if it has no permanence, then it isn't real. Because anything that is real is permanent. Do you see the difference? Everything that is mutable, of course, can be changed. That's the meaning of mutability. But anything that is immutable, which cannot be changed, this is, of course, divine and already perfect. And because of its perfection, it has its immutability, do you see? So God is not far away. And by clamoring for him, tugging on his coat tails, following in his footsteps, I mean by staying close to him in thought, not fearing, and this is a very important point, not fearing because you've done a few wrong things or still have some bad habits yet, that because you've got a few bad habits and you're doing a few wrong things, that you're going to hide from God. You don't really want to get close to him. This is one of the senses the enemy uses. He uses a sense of condemnation. He'll tell you did something wrong. You already know it. So by telling you you've done something wrong, he makes you feel condemned. And by condemnation, he triumphs over you, you see. Because you accept it and you run away from God. And you feel that you've done wrong and you ought to be forgiven and you ought to do better. And you're not good enough for the Lord. Therefore you feel that maybe by staying away from him and hiding yourself, you're going to help the Lord. Because you don't want to contaminate him with your vibrations. Isn't that an amazing thing? You feel you don't want to contaminate God with your human vibrations. It doesn't work that way. If you are ever cleansed and perfected and ready for your ascension, it will be because the love of God has accepted you as you are and has cleansed you as you are from whatever you think you were. And a very important part of that cleansing process has to do with purging the mind of the very ideas I'm talking about. Do you understand? The ideas, the self-limiting ideas, these are destructive. Now, if we can only fix in our consciousness this reality of the kingdom of God, it may not mean that we're going to be free every moment from human boredom, which is residual in human consciousness. It does not mean that every minute is going to be glorious and flooded with light, because you still have a momentum to overcome. And you say to yourself, I've got a momentum to overcome. It may take me a whole lifetime to overcome it. Yes, it might. It might even take you 2 or 3 lifetimes. I'm not denying you the possibility of making the ascension at the close of this embodiment at all. I'm just simply being honest with you. St. Paul says, they promise them liberty, but they themselves are the servants of corruption. Beware of the minister or the holy man who stands up before you and tells you that if you follow his advice, he can assure you that you will make it all the way back to God. Your life's going to be a breeze. Everything's going to be wonderful. You won't have any problems. Well, if you were that kind of a holy man, the whole world would beat a path to your door to buy your better mousetrap. But even our Heavenly Father himself could not devise any better method than he has through the Christ consciousness. And the Christ consciousness cannot work unless you apply it. Now, how can you make a promise out of that is greater than the promise of God? Can you? Well, how can you take away from it, by human nonsense, the great inherent power it has to give you your freedom? So you see, no matter how you look at it, from what angle you look at it, this is the way to your freedom. It's just that you can't fix it in time. So what do they try to do? They try to discourage the aspirant somewhere along the pathway and tell the aspirant, well, you're not making a lot of progress. We have people living in this town today, living off of this property, yet still members of this organization who have had the experience of this temptation. They know what it means to be told you're not making enough progress. That is a subtlety which borders on one of the strategies of darkness. And it is a clever means of defrauding us of real happiness. So don't in any way permit yourself to be swayed ever by human ideas. God is directing the course of your life if you are attuning with him. If you're not, tune in. It's that simple. It's simply alternatives. If you're not tuning in with God, tune in. If you are, then, of course, according to a degree level now, he is directing the course of your life. It's a matter of the surrender of the self. The more you retain of the right to make your own choices, absolutely, the more you retain of the right to reject, and the more you do reject of reality, the longer it's going to take you. Therefore, the simplest course of all is complete surrender to God, realizing that he probably is going to kick it back to you anyway. And my experience has been that he does. Whenever I've surrendered to him, it isn't very long before I hear a voice speaking to me and saying, well, Mark, I appreciate your vote of confidence in me, but I also have confidence in you. And I put my seed in you, a seed of light. And that seed is going to manifest according to your faith. And I want you to exercise that faith and that talent. That's why I created you separate from myself and yet still a part of myself. Was so that you could experience the same reality that I am. Do you see? That's a beautiful thing. So, people fear all their lives to surrender to God because they think he's going to swallow them up. And so what does swallow them up? the dragons of the world. And I remember when Mary Spellshouse was helping me carry that mattress upstairs over at Holy Tree House in Virginia, that a part of the mattress was too awkward for me to get a hold of, and I was tugging the mattress. I says, Mary, get a hold of the back of it. And I said, something's dragging. She says, I'll say it is. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Something is dragging. And that is the dragging of the world energy. The world energy trailing in the dust. I think you see what I'm talking about. So you have to be big enough and wise enough to let go and let God do it, and also smart enough to know when it isn't God that's doing it. When something else has a hold of you for a moment or a hold of your thought, learn to oust it. You are the God of your own world. You are the God of your own universe. And by exercising that prerogative, you are doing no despot to God at all. In fact, you're honoring Him. It's only when you do otherwise, when you reject, when you ignore the precepts and mandates that you've been given, you don't take up your options, that is exactly when you are dishonoring God. Because if you don't take up your cosmic options, what options are you taking up? You're taking up the options to run a little business, to have a little house, to have a car, bank account, prestige in the world. Now this might be all right for a few years. You might even enjoy it physically, outwardly. But would it give you anything of a lasting value? You already know the answer. What is it that everybody wants today in the world? You see, it was sought after by Andrew Carnegie, and he had all the money that he could get his hands on. But what did he want more than anything else? He wanted to be remembered in the minds of people forever. So he established the Carnegie Public Libraries. This succumbing to human vanity, the perpetuation of name and fame beyond the grave, is still the goal of many people. When the late John Kennedy was struck from the roll calls of this earth, the family thought in terms of he is now immortal. When Lincoln was assassinated, as he gasped his last breath, one of the men said, now he belongs to the ages. Well, didn't he always belong to the ages? Do you see? What ages are they talking about? History. But what is the meaning of a history of imperfection by comparison to a cosmic history of perfection? You are the living answer. And as you drink it deeper and deeper and deeper, as you imbibe it to its fullest, you find God within yourself. And then the task is easier, and you decide that above all things, Him alone must you serve and do His will. And the world thinks you're defrauded, and they wonder what's wrong with you. And who is defrauded? Why, they are, of course. Because one day they will know it. But also, let us all hope that one day they will realize what a true goal is. And then you are not going to see the destruction of the world, but the construction of the world according to the highest manifestations of the Spirit. You'll see people marvelously unfolding. All things will develop according to a master plan. And the ascension will become as natural an expression as eating or drinking, as natural a function as walking down the street. People will be schooled from childhood on that the ascension is the goal, the return to God. But the return to God is not the type of thing like now he belongs to the ages. Now God has swallowed him up like Jonah was swallowed up by the whale. It's not that at all. When you ascend back to God, that's when you begin to live. Because then you're a part of immortality. You are not a part of immortality here in your dual concept. Your soul is. But then, are you your soul in reality today? You're supposed to be. But most of us are not. We're not really a part of the soul. We're more a part of the personality than we are of the soul. We identify more with the personality. What is your name? When were you born? How much do you weigh? What are you going to do with your life? Your life. It's a separate thing. Separation, the remoteness of God. Let us return to his nearness, and we shall be in the center of progress forever and forever and forever. Thank you.